What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and once again, another major intermittent fasting study knocks it out of the park. Yes, not too confident that any of those pundits will talk about this study, but it is another meta-analysis, but this time focusing directly on alternate day fasting. Now, we're gonna go ahead and break that down in this video. Stay tuned. Alright guys, not going to bog you down, but if you do want the Fledge Fitness jump rope, it's only $16.50. You can click on the top right hand corner of this video or down in the description box below. And of course, as always guys, thank you for your support. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the video. Alright, so I don't want to beat a dead horse and reiterate this, but I do feel that these pundits that are anti-intermittent fasting will not touch on another meta-analysis, that is controlled, randomized, crossover design studies that were selected. And if you didn't know, just a reminder, meta-analysis sits at the top of scientific studies in terms of scientific references and it being the hierarchy of scientific evidence. So it's more important than all of the other pieces of evidence in terms of scientific studies. So it has a lot of weight, especially if it carries randomized controlled trials within the study design. And that's what this study did. It is an alternate day fasting study that looked at randomized controlled trials versus ADF, so alternate day fasting, all the way back from 1988 up to 2020. And they got a bunch of results. Of course, they had to look at everything and ensure that it was a randomized controlled trial within alternate day fasting. So those specifics had to be there. It didn't matter if the person was overweight or normal weight. Everything applied. They simply wanted randomized control with alternate day fasting. What they had to do was whittle it all the way down to 7 studies that had 269 participants. So this should show you how many flawed studies are actually out there, or studies that don't use a randomized control trial and just look at one element. Randomized control trials are much more significant because they show what happens if you have a group not participate in the intervention diet, which is alternate day fasting, and you have the alternate day fasting literally go head to head with that group and see what they do and what they get, and then look at the differences between the two to see if it's statistically significant, which means that it is more than likely because of the intervention that these results or these outcomes were seen in the study. Boy, oh boy, it wasn't just significant, it was massively significant, with the results showing p-values of 0.00002. And if you didn't know, the turning point or the moment where it is shown to be statistically significant is 0.05, the p-value being 0.05. Anything less than that is even more statistically significant. Anything higher than that is considered not statistically significant. And this is statistically significant across the board. And we're going to go down the line on all of these different points versus just caloric restriction. So ADF versus normal caloric restriction. What are the results? Significant reduction in weight body mass, better low density lipoprotein, better reduction in triglycerides, better reduction in fat mass specifically, even better blood pressure results in the ADF group versus calorie restriction only group. But one thing that was interesting is that insulin resistance in and of itself didn't have any massive changes. Also, it is something that we should note that the ADF group did not retain as much lean mass as just the caloric restriction group. But please keep in mind that an important measurement for maintaining lean mass is actual resistance training, and that was not accounted for in this study. We didn't have the data for if they were or were not doing resistance training. We simply had the data on what they were eating, what the caloric intake, and what the results were for the diet intervention, ADF, or the control group. Also, high density lipoprotein did not show any significant difference between the caloric restriction group as well as ADF, and fasting blood sugar was actually not different between the two groups. But the major difference that they saw was fat mass reduction. And fat mass reduction was seen in both overweight groups versus overweight groups in ADF versus control, and normal weight groups versus normal weight groups in ADF versus control. So basically across the board, it didn't matter if you were an overweight adult or if you were a normal weight adult, you still saw lower fat mass reduction or an increase in fat mass reduction and reducing triglycerides, which is part of the body fat, and weight reduction went down. Another thing that went down in the ADF group is the caloric intake. So a lot of you would say, well, there you go. There's the thing. There's the smoking gun for why they lost weight. But please keep in mind that reducing calorie intake is part of the equation because they were not measuring caloric intake. For the majority of the time, they were doing ad libitum, but they were able to still create caloric deficits without paying too much attention to it, while the people who were doing caloric deficits were not able to either maintain it or do it significantly enough where it offset the benefits that were coming from ADF in terms of fat loss. So of course, as I always said, calories matter. They absolutely do matter. But fat mass, for example, was still a significant drop even with the caloric intake being the same, because the fat burning is the actual superior element that intermittent fasting has because of the mechanistic switchover, the metabolic switchover that takes place that actually targets body fat just within its design. That's why intermittent fasting has that body fat burning benefit plus other health benefits on top, but that body fat burning benefit is there. But still, you must have a caloric restriction, or you must be at a caloric deficit, a net negative energy balance for you to even see that fat loss happen. If not, your body will just be able to store more energy because you are taking in more energy than you're expending. But that's the difference. The body fat loss is still much more pronounced in those who do an intermittent fasting system versus just doing caloric restriction. That's the key benefit that you'll see in something like alternate day fasting, for example. And I want to touch on their conclusion, their little conclusion, just a little blurb inside of their conclusion to reiterate the differences between something like an intermittent fasting system and just counting calories, and what they said after looking at multiple studies. Remember, guys, this is not a single paper. This is one paper that synthesizes the data of multiple studies that are randomized, controlled. So they're very stringent in their methodology, and then we're getting that data and putting it all into one study. Like I said before, it's the top of the pyramid in terms of the importance for scientific evidence. And the blurb reads like this. This meta-analysis suggested that ADF is a potentially superior alternative to daily calorie restriction in both normal weight and overweight subjects. It is a potentially superior alternative. It's not a good alternative or another way to do something. It is possibly a superior alternative based off of this meta-analysis that puts all of these different studies together. Of course, with all things science and scientific evidence, we still want to see more. We always want to see more. But if someone comes to you with a single paper on why ADF is not superior, I'll take that single paper and raise you 7 controlled, randomized, design, alternate day fasting studies that looked at multiple different bullet points in terms of health and body weight, body mass loss, and show you that no, unfortunately, in terms of what we have so far, the studies that we have dating back to 1988 up until 2020, alternate day fasting is scientifically superior to simply reducing calorie intake. Hopefully this video was very informative and has also helped you guys understand a little bit more about the benefits and what you could expect from alternate day fasting. Of course, the link to that study will be down in the description box below. That study was published in the Journal of Frontiers in Nutrition by Yang Zhang and colleagues, and they did a masterful job synthesizing this data and showing us what the differences are between ADF and caloric restriction. Of course, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon, and I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. as always, guys, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace!